Hi, my name is Benedict. In this video, we are going to talk about, well, I'm going to talk, you can talk back in the comments. We're going to talk about EQ, equalization, tone control. Now, I see people often being kind of confused about what they should do and how it works. To some extent, I get that because it took me quite some time to understand EQ. But one of the things that's not really discussed is that there are really two stages of EQ. And while there is some crossover, indeed, you really want to be thinking differently in each stage. So the first stage is obviously sound design. We've got our sound and we say, well, how do I want the basic tone to be the sound? And then we have to mix it. They're two quite different stages, and the way that you handle it in one stage is not necessarily the same way you're going to handle it in the other stage. Before we get into that, I will of course ask/remind you that this is a result of 30 years of work and of course all the time that goes into making the video, editing it, putting up the titles, all that kind of stuff as well. So if you're getting value from this, while it's very easy to walk away without hitting a like or a subscribe or anything, please understand that that doesn't help. It doesn't help you because you haven't committed to the video and the content of it either, so why not actually return some value, invest yourself in this, pop over to my Ko-fi or Ko-fi, whichever way it's pronounced, and return some value. That way you've invested in this information and it's going to stick with you a lot longer and you will appreciate its value much more. Okay, into content. As I said, we have two phases of EQing, and yes, the word phase. I have a whole other video on how this obsession with how EQ is messing up with our phase. Go watch that. Phase is a part of this. I'm not going to discuss it here, but EQ is a result of phase shifting. So of course there will be some phase moves. Is that going to be an impact on what we do? Absolutely not, because we're using our brains always, not watching the screen. Righto, so sound design is the first stage in which we should be working with our sound. And as I said before, that's the point where we have our sound. We have our bass sound and we're going beep, 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 and we're sort of going, is this the sound that I feel like I want to play? Now we'll modify that and beep, 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 beep. Yeah, that's kind of good. Now I feel a little bit more Rickenbackery, so add some Rickenbackeriness to the EQing. And that's the sound that we feel like we want to play with that represents the lines that we're playing. That's the sound design stage. We can be quite aggressive, and often we should be quite aggressive at that point because we want to achieve very specific results. Second stage is in mixing, and rather than now sculpting one sound, we're sculpting the balance. So the way that we alter that bass sound has now got to do with regards to the mix. While it's very tempting, just seeing we soloed that sound when we were working our sound design phase, we might solo that sound at our mixing and then go make a whole pile of changes to make it more perfect. And while that may make it seem more perfect in solo, it won't fit back in the record. We've probably made it less able to fit into the piece. So the mixing stage is far more subtle. It's about sculpting the balance of the mix. And also, depending on where you are in the process, whether you're working on an instrument or a bus, there's always a sense now of working on gluing the elements of this mix together. If we're working on drums and bass, we want to glue them together. And while compression is a way to glue them together, and saturation is a way to glue them together, EQ is also a really important way of gluing things together. And then, of course, the third stage is mastering. Now, mastering EQ is slightly different, but really it's far more like mixing EQ. Once you understand how to mix EQ, as opposed to sound design EQ, then mastering EQ is relatively easy. It just requires some practice and to go, am I winning with this? And again, that's always about how is this working with the brain. It's never about sitting there going, well, that's the perfect position for this knob because you're going nowhere with that, you don't learn. Again, the reminder, be aware of each phase and that you will behave slightly differently, but also be aware of each phase that's coming. So when we're sound designing, it's super easy to say, well, this is bass, I need to add 300 dB of 40 hertz, so that this is like the biggest ever. The problem is it's never going to be mixable, ever. So be aware, and the more you see EQing in these different phases, the more you'll be aware of, at this phase, what am I going to want at the next and the next? So you'll simply not do the things that are going to be a problem, and you'll pre-do some of the things so you don't need to be doing excessive cleanup, say at the mixing phase, when you can tidy things up at the sound design phase. That's the mindset. So here is our piece, a few bars of repetitive music. Nothing is done to this. We've just got a mix, but it's a bit not really cohesive. Now it's mixed. And there are two stages of EQing that have gone into this. The first stage is at the sound design. We'll go through each of these. And the second stage is at the mix EQ. So this EQ was done to set up what I think is the right kit sound, because I've processed the whole kit in one go. It's easy. And this is where I think we need to look at it to make it balance and sculpt and glue together. Great. So it's two layers. As you see, different things have been done. There are some similarities and some differences in what the curves look like. Probably the most notable one being this is a lot more dramatic than this. Not that it's the only way to look at it, but generally speaking, you're going to want your sound design EQ to be more dramatic. If you're having to do dramatic things at the mix point, probably tells me you didn't understand what was going on at the beginning. So perhaps go back and fix that sound. So again, this is our mixed piece. The only difference is EQ. And this is it raw. While certain things are more present, the piece has no particular feel or sonic imprint. Nothing glues it together. Whereas now, we've got a clear sense of what we're saying. We've got that very tom-driven triplet thing. It's an eighth triplet thing. And it's really tom-driven more than kick and snare-driven. They are incidental, really. We've got our guitar riff and our bass. Our bass is actually really important in here. And then that little string line, which forms the lead and keeps things rolling along. Notice how the drums are a lot clearer. They're just cleaner and clearer, and there's no drive used here, other than at the mix there's a little bit of saturation. Tape and tube. But that was there across the board, and that is there here as well. So it's not really a part of the factor. It's just, this is all and only EQ. So EQ is actually more important than saturation. Saturation is brilliant, don't get me wrong, but EQ is more important. You master EQ, you don't really need saturation. At least not as much, and that's great. By the time you need something to be able to sound okay, something's wrong. So now let's also look at in an alternate situation. Here is our same piece. We're now going to have it like it's through our iPhone. Yay. It's in mono and it's thin as... Listen carefully, and you probably notice it feels like things stick out in this mix. So not only do we not have things seeming to sort of randomly stick out anymore, and again, no compression, we've also got a much greater sense of clarity, as well as, within the confines of the horrible EQ limitation, we've gotten warmer. Because obviously, if you haven't worked this out, this is a slightly gothy sort of a feel. So it wants to be a bit warmer, and this is not got that. And that's over an iPhone speaker type playback system. Let's go to a different kind of a playback system, and I will refer to that loosely as a NS10. So, lightening the load on the bottom end. It's okay, but it's just gritty. Warmer, cleaner, clearer, a lot more nuanced and smooth and grooving. Listen to that bass. We can really feel the bass working really well, even though a lot of bottom end is rolled off. Whereas here, we're struggling with that bass. Bass isn't doing its job. Whereas here, it is, which is to create that groove. So not only does it give us a nicer sound overall in good speakers, but it actually improves the mix and the intelligibility of the story that we're telling dramatically in bad speakers. This is what mixing is about. Right, let's have a look in a little bit more detail. So we'll solo our sounds, our drums. These are Goran Groove's rock standards, so they actually have reverb from the room in which they were played, he tells me, and that naturally can be a little gluggy, and because I'm going very tom heavy, it's very easy to end up with a great big pile of stuff happening in here, which we want that tom roll hanging on sound, but we don't want it to accumulate too much. You'll see that I've actually taken out quite a bit of real low end because it's not serving any great purpose. I can get better clarity. Remember, always in mixing we're after not bass, but we're after punch, snap and sizzle. So by clearing off an appreciable amount of bass here, focusing to get our snap so that these toms have a real snap on the front of them. Often you'd be doing a snap on your snare, but that's incidental here. And the sizzle up here, even though we've rolled off a lot of bright, we want this to feel warm, but clear. So that's the kit sound. Now on its own, you might say, but that's not as nice as we'd like, and that's where you'd be going and boosting bass and doing all kinds of things. Remember, we need to be aware of each phase. So in other words, we need to be aware of what's going to come next. But quite dramatic moves, like we'll see here. I'm removing this to give a warmer sound, so it gives the feeling of that being a little bit further away, whilst making it very present because of this and this. So it's actually giving us a loudness curve as well as giving a sense of distance as well. So it's both exciting and distant. And then we add this extra little bit of EQ. See how that brings the snap forward? It's very minor, but you should feel the snap comes forward. And I've taken the point really just here, so it's the beginning of the kick where it's brighter, that I've actually put a tiny push in, because remember we've rolled a lot of the bottom end of that kick off. So by pushing just a little bit here, then we're just giving it a little bit of a goose, because it was tending to get a little bit lost. Tempting to say, oh well, I'll turn that off, so now I've got this boom. But we know that while that sounds cool in solo, it's going to become problematic in the mix, especially with less than full range speakers. So we whack that back in, have this in, and go from raw but kind of nowhere to now very much a statement. And in no way am I saying this is the settings that you should use, because that is not how mixing works. I know people want it to. Oh, so can you send me the preset so that I can apply that? No, because I'm a mix engineer, I'm not a fool. So I won't encourage you to be a fool either. And I know people don't like the negativity, but the thing is, it's a negative thing to do, so why encourage it? Because that is true negativity. So you've got to find this within the sounds that you've got, but more importantly within the scene and story of the piece of music. Note, as I've said, goth. So I need to pull this out, to pull the sounds out in a way that sit with that. Okay, bass. Normally I wouldn't be working really in solo, but need to do that for you to make it easy. So raw sound. Hear how that becomes a lot more exciting. It feels like it's bass here, and there's obviously a lot more cut. So that's kind of its snap and its punch. Note that while it would be very tempting to do this, that's not been done because it's going to become seriously problematic down the track. And I did look at those sorts of options, but it caused more problems than good. It's entirely up to you how you mix, but just be very careful. So I'm deliberately saying, while this sounds cool, busy man, we don't need this sound to be amazing on its own, we need it to be amazing in the mix. So rather than pushing the fundamental of the sound, the lowest bit, I've actually pushed the first harmonic. By pushing the first harmonic, the brain goes, oh, that fundamental must be louder. So it actually does a volume boost on that fundamental without us having to give away the level that it takes to do this kind of thing. See? Lots of bad level. Whereas here, I've actually added level whilst making it better. So really lost. Now actually cutting the mix. And then our second round, that's where I have said, okay, I'm going to do a little bit to this fundamental. So we've got a little bit of a boost on our kick, which is here, and a tiny bit of a boost on our bass, which is there. So we've said kick in one place, bass underneath it, this way here. And that's good practice. So we've now got our kickers being a little high, but our bass as being low, which says to the mind of the listener, bass low, bass bassy. And then again, we're pulling this presence in. While it's tempting to be making all these decisions in solo, it's only in the mix that they make sense. Now with this EQ here, hear how these aren't really quite together? They're now working together. Normally with a mix like this I would have a bus where I've put my bass and my drums together into the one bus, and there'd be some kind of something compression, maybe some EQ there as well, which would help glue them, but I wanted to show simply here. So now we've got a really nice rhythm section that's fulfilling its tasks really, really well with a pretty minimal amount of EQ. Again, a bit more dramatic here, especially with this, and less dramatic here. Not a rule, but it's one of those things that if you see it the other way around, then chances are you probably didn't quite get it right the first time. Then we've got our guitar. This is just a VST, it's a funny sound, but that's the sound that I decided to have. That's an even stranger sound, of course. I've rolled off everything under here because it serves no purpose. So first thing I did was go, oh, well, okay, at what point do I lose everything that has any particular value? Nothing to say that you can't, but it was nice to have that little fundamental. And then I thought, look, it's nice to give it a little bit of bass, and then looked at cutting some bits out of it. And got rid of the fizzies on top. They just don't serve anybody. Very tempting to keep a lot of treble up here. Let's turn that up. Thinking, oh, well, that maybe makes it cut. But at the same time, it just kind of makes it fizzy. So you've got to decide what you want your sound to be like. I decided that for better or worse. So as you see here, this is quite dramatic. And then when we get to the EQ here, it's pretty minimal. Doesn't quite feel like it fits. Now it fits. So remember, the mixing, we're sculpting the balance. We're not worried about this sound. We're worried about the mix. We're worried about how do things sit in the mix. And so we adjust this so that it feels like it settles into the mix. Now, I do not mean carving holes for one thing to go to another. Somebody had a go at me just earlier in the week where somebody had been asking about side chaining, and I'd reminded him that it's actually ducking. And I had a bit of a sense of humour about duck this, duck that, and duck the ducking. And this guy decides to kind of just take me on. And he goes, oh, well, what's so wrong with side chaining? And I felt like, well, dude, you're attacking me personally for some stupid reason. But the response that I wanted to give to him was that, fella, I'm a mix engineer, which means my job is to mix things together. I'm not a make sounds avoid each other engineer. Think about that carefully. If your first and only tool in your toolkit for mixing is to duck sounds out of the way of each other, oh no, there's a sound, I better duck everything else out of the way so that my mix is constantly doing this. While it may feel very clever, and it is a legitimate thing, but not the way that it's done these days as first line, again, I'm a mix engineer. My job is to make these things mix together and become as one, not just spend their time ducking out of each other's way like whack-a-moles. There are occasionally situations where I will say, look, that's just not going to sit comfortably together and allow me to have the two tones that I want, in which case then I will look at ducking something. I had a situation with a fiddle and a vocal line, and they were just both too good. So they were both trying to take attention at once. Tried various things with tone and what have you, but it primarily wrecked the violin sound, which was beautiful. And very nice playing too, which was one of the problems. It was too good. So the thing was, I then took to ducking. I don't think I used just level, I think I used some tone as well, but I just had the listener feel like it moved out of the way, even though it felt like it was still there just the same. So it was a combination of factors, including using some ducking via a side chain, which came from the vocal. So it's a thing, but it's my last thing, because, again, my job is to work out how to make these mix. Again, listen very carefully. The guitar doesn't feel like it's quite glued to the mix. Guitar feels like it's now glued to the mix, which makes it rhythmically stronger That's mixing. Mixing's like cooking. It's like making an omelette. You smash your eggs and you throw them in. You hack up your mushrooms and you throw them in. You get some chili powder and you throw it in. You hack up some capsicum, you throw it in. They become one. You don't throw some egg in, make a little circle, and then throw a piece of mushroom into a gap in the hole there where there's no egg. That would just be weird in terms of cooking. Who'd want to eat that omelette? Or who'd want to eat that cake where it was just lumps of flour and butter and milk and there's an egg? Mixing has got to work this way. Oh, the cat decides he wants that. So see how everything is quite subtle. This is dramatic to get the tone that I want in that guitar in context. This is a case of really gluing it into the mix, so now it works rhythmically. Again. So you could think, oh, Benedict's used a compressor or something to really pull them together. No, it's just very careful use of tone. That's our guitar and then our strings. This one's quite interesting. The difference is going to be dramatic. Here's our raw sound. Here's round one. Really naturally, like with a lot of strings, we're going to pull out a lot of bottom end. Now there isn't much there, but I still want it out of the way. I want this to feel light and airy, and yet at the same time warm. So this one just puts a little bit of focus to say, okay, I'm going to focus this at 2K. So that's what I was working with. It's like, oh, it's nice and bright. And then it just feels... See, as we put that bass back in, it now fights. It's too full. There are times we might want that kind of fullness, but here, no, we don't, because we need to focus the guitar and the basses and everything else. So that was my, okay, that's my sound design. That's what I think I want the sound to feel like. And then... I've actually kind of done the opposite. I've put body back in and rolled off the treble, which made me think, oh, well, should I have gone and redone this? But once you've been doing this for a while, you will realize that sometimes moves that conflict with each other are a really good plan. And that's part of why I love that EQ is made from phase shifting, because we've got some phase shifts in here as well, which make this sound nowhere near as flat straight line as it was at the beginning. It's a soft synth, so it's kind of like perfect. And I don't want that. I want it to feel like this real live organic sound, but I'm not putting any choruses or anything on it other than EQ. So having these moves that sort of seem to conflict with each other works better than not. So I'm now able to warm this sound up. I'm putting some body back in, but it's still not the same as if I were to just... At which point it becomes kind of gluggy. I'd have to turn the whole level down. The whole idea here, and this is the bit to really understand about mixing EQing, is that we want to focus that sound in a particular place. Now, while you may go, but Benedict, you just talked about mixing not being about making everything get out of the way. Correct. I don't want to make holes, but at the same time, I want to be able to have this sound focused and come across as very, very clear in an area that doesn't compete with everything else. But you see that I'm not using ducking to do that. I'm merely saying, okay, we'll pull this out of focus, allowing this to be more focused, but we'll pull the top end out because it's too thin and fizzy and just not pleasing. And then we made some changes here. While that is nice and pretty to work with, it's not sitting in the mix nicely. It's now sitting in the mix nicely. It pulls it back. Even though it is actually the lead, it's the only truly melodic part there, we still want a lot of focus to be on those drums, that tom pattern, and the rhythm that we're getting, particularly with the bass in there, and of course the guitar, which is really just playing the bass line with a little bit of embellishment. But without this, it just dominates. It's look how pretty I am, look how pretty I am, look how pretty I am. So by finding the point at which we can have it feel very beautiful, it's gone from being like a 17-year-old girl who just thinks that waving them around is going to get her everywhere in life, to a sort of 30, 40-year-old woman who's realised how to truly become beautiful as a person. So a Sophia Loren against a, I don't know, Taylor Swift or whatever, there's a big difference. One of them is a lot classier than the other. So by working out how to make these sounds sit inside the mix, sculpt the balance so that they glue together, we end up with a mix that's significantly better than what we had before. Said things are a bit sort of spiky and just kind of leave hands, which is very obvious in the iPhone mode. So this, which is clarified and given focus to the toms, the bass, the guitar, and made the string sit in a much nicer space. Now, ideally, this would have a vocal. Obviously, we would change a few things with regards to that, and I would actually personally mix the vocal first. There was one other thing that I did, and that was the EQ. The EQ is my new pet tape deco. Let's go and pop this guy into solo. So there was some EQ put on this. This is it. But it's pretty thick. This really accentuates the groove or the lurch in the piece. That's great. I always go for this as I'm working, so I can't say exactly how I did it. I do this because this is what I do. You know, mixing's about helping enhance the groove. It's not about saying I've got to find X number of BPM. It's like, how can I make this? And it does. So just to give you some context. I then added this EQ. The difference may seem relatively minor. I got rid of all the low lows because there's no great joy in having them there. I did add a little bit of a boost here. Normally I wouldn't, normally I'd be cutting this out. But I wanted to feel like it has a nice warmth of the room, and that's in our punch area, not in our bass area. So it gives us a nice sort of feeling of. And our main sounds are nice and clean. This is coming a little bit later, but it's because bass being slower. I've pulled some frequencies out of the way here, where it's sort of too thick and tubby. I can barely hear the changes in these cans, it's atrocious. Given a lot more clarity, so that is a snap. So I've given the reverb a lot more ability to snap here. That'd be why it was muted. I don't like the bypass button on this. And then rolled off some of the really high highs, which is normal enough because they don't really exist in Reverb world, and they're just going to sound a little digital if they are there. So we've got this reverb, which is pretty thick, but now the reverb itself has nice clarity as well as helping to enhance the punch of the bass. It's sitting right in the middle there of that. So if we pop this fella back into the mix, no reverb. no EQ. Hear how that actually lifts? It lifts the feeling of the whole piece. So your reverb is really super important there. We could look at mastering EQs, but we're not going to because I just plain didn't use one. I don't think it was necessary at this point. Maybe coming back at some other stage, I might say, oh yes, I can clarify it in some way, but it's not really necessary, and it would be no different from what I've shown you with any of these sorts of moves where we've merely found the right kind of way of sculpting the balance to glue the sounds together so that they groove nicely. So in conclusion, we started here, which is not real well glued together at all. Balance, the natural balance is okay, but focus is poor. No balance changes. I've kept the levels pretty even, Steven. I don't use level matches or anything like that, but I did stuff which I normally do here just to try to have them seem, so there wasn't a feeling like, oh, that sound changed levels. In particular here, they changed tone, so that gives you a very different feel. But now, the bass is doing its job really well. The drums are really nice and clear. The guitar sits in its pocket really, really nicely, and the string gives us the lyricism without dominating. Raw, I mean, listenable, we can understand the piece. Elegant. Again, if we go into iPhone mode, while it sounds bad in both ways, it sounds so much more controlled. And while we can't say we can hear the bass, we can feel it much better. See how this has got poor rhythm? Which means that even though there is no bottom end on this at all, it's hacked off at 1 or 2K, we can actually feel that rhythm from the bass. If we put this into a fake NS10 mode, again, really nice, improved clarity. This actually helps us hear the bass a little bit clearer, the NS10 mode, with a bass cut, boys and girls. But this has real cut. So remember, we mix for punch, snap, and sizzle. We've got all of those here, often by making moves that seem contrary to what you might think you might want to do, but we've got a beautiful sound as a result. If you have any questions about this, pop them on down below, preferably after going over to my coffee and singing me a couple of dollars for the time and energy that I've given you for a lesson. That's 40 minutes, so within 5 minutes, it would be 45 minutes. You'd be paying an hour, $60 an hour if I were a piano teacher trained at the conservatorium. I am the equal of that within my own abilities, so $5. It's got to be pretty darn fair, hasn't it? Again, like I said, ask questions. More importantly, if you are looking for someone to mix your record, reach out. There is an address down below. Reach out. There is a massive form on my site. Have a look at my site, see my work. You should have worked out my style by now already. And it's not goth. It's about finding the flavour of what your song is about. Then either fill in that form or contact me via Facebook. You may need to make sure that I'm aware that that request is there because they're not always visible to me as they should be. Most importantly, get out there, have fun.